The early 19th century French philosopher Auguste Comte is credited as the founder of sociology. His philosophical direction often took him to places where he wanted to fix society or at least make it better. He sought for remedies to alleviate the social malaise that stemmed primarily from an all too economically stratified society. He influenced Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill with his critical observations about human social actions and inactions. His work also fed the introduction of anthropology as a formal discipline and influenced one of its very early founders, Herbert Spencer. Comte is best known for a term or a phrase that he invented called the religion of humanity, which essentially maintained that cohesion in society works best when not left to church institutions. I think this may qualify him as an honorary Unitarian. His compelling concept about religion residing more in the human breast than with church authorities peddling tired dogmas, accounts for a proliferation of various secular humanist organizations. And while engaged in exploring the meaning of religion of humanity with its attendant injunction to live for others, Comte, in fact, coined the word altruism, which draws upon its Latin roots meaning the other. So altruism gives the other weight and meaning and focus. Nice idea, but we still don't fully get it. Altruism as a concept had difficulty gaining traction because it felt positively counterintuitive to one's own self-interest. The question of the day in the early part of the 19th century was, why would people be willing to control their inclination to act in their own interest in order to enhance the interest of others? But isn't that still the basic question today that limits a just distribution of resources to those in need? Comte referred to altruism as the unselfish regard for the welfare of others. Now, that may be true, but no one can really get their arms around why do it. Now, in our era, social scientists have zeroed in on the study of individual commitment to group survival. But the motivation for individuals to essentially minimize their own self-interest in order to enhance the success of the group, getting to some kind of a root understanding why that happens, what possesses people to do that, remains elusive, especially in these glory days where everything's about looking out for number one. Altruism had piqued the interest of social scientists for the past several decades. They really wanted to figure this thing out. Some see altruism as a generally transmitted disposition, as a genetically transmitted disposition. Others interpret it as a product of social indoctrination, which is what we're trying to do here this morning on Celebration. Some see it simply as a constituent of being human. Auguste Comte's old idea about the religion of humanity. No big explanation is necessary. This is what we do as people. We feel a responsibility to others and to institutions established for the sake of caring for others. Now, studies have shown that women are more inclined to share their wealth than men. But there has been nothing concrete that accounts for some men acting miserly while others act generously. Until last year. A magnificent breakthrough in the research of social science. Let me give you a hint of where this is going. Take Bill Gates. Bill Gates en route to becoming the world's richest man. He rejected all advice to set up a charitable foundation, preferring to wait at least 25 years before he'd give any thought to dishing out his wealth elsewhere. But in 1993, he married Melinda. At their wedding, Bill Gates' mother, Mary, read aloud a piece that she wrote for Melinda with the following message. Great power implies great responsibility. She may have borrowed that from Spider-Man or some superhero, but that's what she put out there at the wedding. Got up, and that was part of her address to Melinda. That was pretty impressive, because before Bill and Melinda were married for 3 years, Bill all of a sudden ranked third on Fortune's list of the most generous philanthropists in America. But the change was due not only to the influence of his mother and wife, but also his firstborn was a girl. Here's the data. The mere presence of female family members, even infants, can be enough to nudge men in the direction towards generosity. In a study of more than 10,000 CEOs who became fathers, the chief executives compensated their employees less when their baby was male. Since there was one more mouth to feed, the CEO drew a greater salary for himself from the firm's resources at the expense of his employees. But if he had a little girl, she would soften up the old man, invoke his caretaking tendencies, and the employees received a higher wage. There are even studies showing that American legislators with daughters vote more liberally, especially regarding policies on reproductive rights. Another study shows that the more sisters a father has, the more time he spends raising his own children. After growing up with sisters, men who have the opportunity to give are more likely to do so. The role of women in promoting significant generosity was not lost on Melinda Gates. When Bill Gates and Warren Buffett convened dinners for billionaires to discuss philanthropy, Mrs. Gates made sure that all the wives were invited too. She said, even if he's the one making the money, she is the gatekeeper. So the message this Celebration Sunday is aimed entirely at the women of this congregation. This church is looking at you. Let me tell you. Now, women are so generous and kind and warm-hearted, and of course, every rule has its exception, as we know. I mean, like Becky Lockhart, for example. She just ruins it. I love the fact that in 2007, the psychologist Roy Baumeister gave a huge presentation in San Francisco where he asked, "Is there anything good about men?" And the short answer to his lengthy lecture was, not much. Psychologically, men are geared towards acts of aggression and selfishness. The generous heart, for the most part, is not in their wheelhouse. I tell you, I don't think this church would have survived 123 years if it weren't for the women. And that's not a flip comment. In all my years in this church, it has been women exclusively who have chaired all the fundraising efforts, from auction to theater nights to used book sales, on and on. It's always women. And for as long as I can remember, women have spearheaded the pledge drive. And of course, for more than 100 years, we had the Women's Alliance that really kept this church going strong. And we are so indebted to more than a century worth of their hard labors. Now, men have been useful in setting up, cleaning up, but the women actually personify what the social scientists refer to as the individual commitment to group survival. Women get what Comte referred to as living for others, where others occupy a central place in their own lives. So I propose that this year, we're only going to have the women turn in the pledge cards after the service. If you are male and without a wife, show your pledge card to the woman sitting nearest to you. Ask her advice. Is this generous enough? What do you think? But ultimately, why does it matter? Why do we want this church not just to exist, but to flourish? I'll tell you a true story. A few years back, while I was on a flight, the guy next to me asked, "What do you do for a living?" I generally sidestep that question because it invites a whole messy affair. But I don't know, for some reason that day, the truth was just lodged in the bosom of its cleric. And I said, I'm a Unitarian minister in Salt Lake City. You laughed. But then he said, "No, really, I mean it. What do you really do?"